promoting successful business experts, connecting people throughout the world from my podcast studio in Brazil. Joining us today from Vienna, Austria, Sharon Ehrlich, CEO, performance coach, a strategist for high-performing women. So Sharon, how has your experience as an expat in Austria influenced your approach to leadership and coaching?
Well, first, Tom, thank you for inviting me to your show. To answer your question, I would say that being an expat has given me the possibility to work with people from all around the world. I'm not the only expat who's living in Vienna. As you
Right.
could imagine, that Vienna is the easternmost Western European city in Europe. And so it is a hub.
It's a,
And I have worked with teams where 50 nations have been represented, which means that I've had to learn how to communicate and make myself understood by people who were not native speakers.
right.
I had to work with people who had a completely different work ethic. When you think about it, when I came to Austria in 1999, the whole Eastern Bloc had only been open for capitalism for a very short period of time. So I was working with people who had a different sort of life philosophy and a different ideology that they were governed with, and how they experienced working was completely different. And so I had to adapt. I had to learn, be incredibly flexible. And I think the core message here is about communication and listening before you speak, because we think that we're always understood, but people don't always understand us because we're already lining up our next sentence. And sometimes you need to take a breath and pause and let people have a chance to react and respond.
And to your point, Vienna obviously is a cultural center, has been for years. Let's say from a business standpoint, has become more and more important. So when you have all of these different melting pots, right? And then back to what you said, understanding simple words like compliance becomes something completely different.
Absolutely.
So you got your feet on the ground, you've made your footprint, and you've evolved with that. So you are, what you do and your coaching, is it Europe-centric or is it global-centric?
It's actually global-centric, but most of my clients are in Europe. It just happens that way because of time zones, and it makes it a lot easier to do business.
Right.
But that being said, I recently had a client who was in Australia. It was a big challenge for us to find a time that we can talk to one another.
Right.
But LinkedIn is a marvelous space to be on. If I post 2 or 3 times a week. So I wouldn't say that I'm incredibly active, but active enough so that I have a presence. People watch. We think that no one's looking at our posts when we do something, but those posts do get legs.
No, they do. They resonate. And one of the things is that we really find that we have a reach that we sort of underestimate our own selves.
Exactly. And especially when we look at vanity metrics, we think that when we look at the metrics, that tells the whole story, but it doesn't always tell the entire story. And so I've had at least 2 instances this year where clients have found me and I never even saw them react one time to something I had done or posted online. And so, I think we're we have an incredible amount of opportunity being able to amplify our voices on all of these different mediums and having people have the possibility to find us. But to answer your question, mostly people in Europe are finding me.
Yeah, and more to that point, I see on your LinkedIn profile, you help ambitious women conquer self-doubt and unleash their superpowers, which really it's the coaching part. It's the nurturing and having that understanding, because Europe is full of expats. The mobility of Europeans has changed dramatically. And, Europeans are everywhere throughout Europe, so...
Yeah, and you know what? If they work for large concerns like publicly traded companies, like I did, I worked for IBM for many years. I worked for Citrix for many years. You end up working with folks who are incredibly ambitious, and their careers take them everywhere.
Right.
So you have people who haven't even lived in their home countries for decades, because every opportunity that presents itself happens to be in a new country, and they have the flexibility and the willingness to travel, and people are very mobile. I'm American, and I'm always surprised at the lack of mobility that Americans still have compared to Europeans. Europeans will, just pick everything up and move across the border or move across, the planet for work. And Americans will do the same, going from New York to the West Coast. But it's not so often that you hear of Americans that are just picking up everything and moving to another continent.
No, that's true. That is, and to the point of Europeans, they have had that because there's been so much business-oriented transition and mobility for hundreds of years.
Right.
So many of the countries have gone out and done the basic footwork of finding opportunities in the world and speaking various languages, which is also something different.
Exactly. Well, you know what? I grew up in New York, and when you were raised as a New Yorker, you're raised to think that New York is the center of the universe. So we have some big egos, native New Yorkers, and if you knew English, this was enough. If you had Spanish, it was a bonus, but we never needed to speak any other languages.
Right.
But when you think about in this part of Europe that I'm living in, the borders are very tight.
Right.
If we go in 1.5 hours in any direction, we might be in another country,
or
right?
3 different countries.
Yeah. And so that demands that people at least have the flexibility, maybe not to be fluent in languages, but to be able to do the most basic things. I was working in Bratislava in Slovakia for 2 years. I was commuting. When I told my family, I'm commuting to Slovakia, they just couldn't understand, can you do that? I said, yes, actually I can, because it's
at
only
that time
an
it
hour
might have
away.
just been a train ride.
Yeah, it was a 1-hour train ride away.
But, sort of commuting in New York.
Exactly. My sister commutes more from New York to New Jersey, where she lives. But you know what? I also learned how to order a cup of coffee in Slovakian and order some basic lunch. I would never go as far as to say that I was fluent in Slovakia, but the 2 years that I worked there, I knew how to get what I needed when I wanted a refreshment, or to be polite, to say hello, thank you, good morning. And this is the sort of flexibility that you have to have when you're working in this cross-cultural, working across borders. You have to be open to that sort of...
And that's open for a simple cup, not a simple, but a cup of coffee or a major career change.
Yeah.
The process, say it's as simple as ordering coffee, but you have to understand all the nuances.
Right. And that's one of the things that leaders look for when people are talking about you when you're not in the room, about the next promotion and the next opportunity and stretch projects. They want to understand how adaptable is that candidate for that. Nobody is going to send anyone across the planet to work someplace if you don't even demonstrate the minimum amount of adaptability, right?
Well, you were in a company that also had a planetary footprint. So it's not even being in the room, it's having persons remember you wherever you are in the world, and thinking you could be a candidate for anywhere.
Absolutely. And that's why one of the things I talk about very often, particularly when I'm coaching mid-career women, is the importance of having mentors and sponsors.
Right.
Because, a mentor is one thing. A mentor is someone who is, giving you their wisdom, teaching you from their past experiences, advising you and guiding you. The sponsor is the person who's talking about you when you're not in the room.
Right. And
The
that involves a
sponsor-
strategy, which you're also a specialist in. So the strategizing is probably, I would say, more important, but it tends to be.
Absolutely. And so, having a sponsor is equally, if not more important than having mentors. And you need a lot of them, right?
That's
not
true.
just one, right? Because as a single person, you can amplify your your accomplishments and achievements in an organization only up to a certain point. And then you need somebody else to amplify your achievements for you so that other people in the organization learn how great you are. And that usually happens when you have a sponsor.
Well, how can our listeners find you to help themselves amplify their career path?
Yeah, well, your listeners can find me on my website, that is livingwhileleading.com, or they can find me on LinkedIn. Sharon Ehrlich is my name. I'd be happy to be followed by you and to follow your listeners just to see what they're posting and check them out online.
Very good. Well, thanks again for being here and sharing.
Yeah, lovely to be with you, Tom.
And again, so for our listeners, you can find more about it. It's Sharon Ehrlich. Her first name is Sharon. The last name Ehrlich. Find her on LinkedIn and her site, which is livingwhileleading.com. Cafe Networking is brought to us by Focus MI Market Intelligence, an agricultural market research specialist in Brazil. More information at focusmi.com. Talk to Tom, talk to the world. Thanks for listening. Till the next time here at Cafe and Networking Podcast.